Hey, good morning. Today is Wednesday, May 10th, 2023. It's 9 a.m. This is a meeting of Senate Natural Resources and Energy.
I don't need one.
We're here to discuss a possible amendment to bring to the floor. And I wanted to, so two things. The big picture is that we have bills that are either not going to make it because they've been taken up, like S93, Advanced with Heat, or S80 now is provision that the fifth floor doesn't say we're guaranteeing we're vetoing this, but now I'm told that it's very likely it will be recommended for veto. So I'd hate to lose a bill by shipping it for something that will sink it ultimately. So I've been talking about trying to gather together things that we have, and so let me pass out this list. Proposal of amendment to gather up work we've already done.
Is this the Bree amendment?
And yes, and put it on 126.
Which one was the one that you were saying is likely to be vetoed?
80. And so I'll go through the list. 80 as amended. 93 just wasn't taken up. 112 includes the Renewable Energy Standard Study, and then we have an alternate design, and I want to present that to the committee. I mean, it's not, I think we're on our 8th or 9th version of it. So that's what I wanted to offer and go through with the committee. Because of, so all these things are wrapped into one amendment so they can travel back to the House as a group. And you can see on the right hand side, we passed 80, 93, and 112. There's dates listed. They've all been there for a while. And the only new piece is this version of the RES versus the last version we looked at. In the last, since last week, I've been CCing the end of last week, CCing the committee on the conversations with JFO and council about how we might consider crafting our own RES language. So that's what I want to go through. And Ms. Schakowsky, if you can walk us through, it's short. That's it. And then the other pieces, Mr. O'Grady's put them all into a longer amendment.
Ellen Schakowsky, Office of Legislative Counsel. So today, post on your website, there's a document from Mike, and then there's a document from me. And what Drew just posted out, handed out, and is also posted under my name, is the RES language. And so just as a heads up, it's this language that's before you in the single document was edited and some small changes were made from, and so it is slightly different than what's in the version posted under Mike's name. However, I did just send the updated version to Jude, and so she can post that. And so they will be merged. So I'll read through this for you now. Section 35 of this proposed amendment is the analysis concerning increasing distributed renewable energy generation and report. So most of this should seem very familiar. On or before August 15th, 2023, the Department of Public Service shall retain the services of an independent third party to conduct a macro analysis using Regional Economic Models, Inc., REMI, modeling or modeling of a similar rigor that would analyze the macroeconomic impacts of changes to the renewable energy standard that would increase the amounts required under Tier 2. This modeling shall be based on the scenarios developed by the department as part of its renewable energy standard review pursuant to 30 VSA 8005B. The department shall consult with the Joint Fiscal Office throughout the process. The department shall provide the relevant stakeholders with the opportunity to provide recommendations on the scenarios modeled, including the inputs and assumptions. The stakeholders shall include Green Mountain Power, the Burlington Electric Department, the Vermont Public Power Supply Authority, the Washington Electric Co-op, the Vermont Electric Co-op, the Vermont Public Interest Research Group, Renewable Energy Vermont, Conservation Law Foundation, the Vermont Electric Power Company, the Vermont Housing and Finance Agency, the Vermont Natural Resources Council, Global Foundries, Associated Industries of Vermont, the Sierra Club, Stowe Electric, and Hyde Park Electric. On or before January 15, 2024, the analysis shall be reported to the House Committee on Environment and Energy and the Senate Committee on Natural Resources and Energy. The duty to implement this section is contingent upon an appropriation in fiscal year 2024 from the general fund to the Department of Public Service for the purpose of providing funding for the analysis described in this section.
So first, are there any committee questions for Mr. Kelsey, sir? And I'm happy to discuss the structure and why at this point landed with this version. You're welcome.
Thank you, Chair Bray. So I just want to understand, I see that we have, so Stowe Electric and Hyde Park Electric, just so I'm understanding, are not under VIPSA. Is that why they're called out separately? Because I think Stowe Electric is not a part of VIPSA, but I wasn't aware. Is Hyde Park also not a part of VIPSA?
I'm not certain. Okay. I can tell you that this is a list of stakeholders that is part of the House's version of the Renewable Energy Standards study. And so this is their group of stakeholders.
Okay.
So the
Clearly irrelevant.
the point,
Oh, okay. Well, I was wondering why that makes
yeah, it
sense.
is a long list, but that was the list of explicit stakeholders that the House version developed. So we wanted to take what they laid out for a stakeholder group. Like any stakeholder group, that it's open to broader participation, like the department's proceeding underway invites the public at large as well as whatever these interested parties. At least this way they are named and included. So a couple things that are in here. When we went through, when we were talking the last, I don't know, 6-8 weeks about the study, I think we, over time, my takeaway from our last meeting when TJ was in here was that in general, the study they had was looking at all the things that we wanted to include. There were a couple open scenarios. There was like an E and F that were TBDs. So this says, my way of saying what this does is down in lines 14 and 15 on the front side of the page. So it names all the interested parties. So they are definitely part of the discussion. And then we already have some scenarios that we knew we wanted to see modeled, but there was a concern about what are the inputs and what are the assumptions, because they can have such an influence on what the scenario or the modeling shows. So this group is now in a named position to help name the scenarios, including their inputs and assumptions. Like the TBDs can be written in by this group. The same people were helping write in something that maybe we didn't think of. So that's the way I'm trying to like integrate them into the process in a named, orderly way, by spelling it out. The other thing that I've worked with JFO, and I don't know if you've read Captain Benham's emails or back and forth, their suggestion is that the modeling will be most useful and accurate if it takes the work product of the scenarios that we're talking about here and feeds them into the REMI model. So that rather than having JFO has said, look, we're not energy experts, even if we're managing a resource and consultant to do that, we would be much more confident about the quality of the REMI analysis if they were integrated into what the department was producing for the scenarios that the REMI analysis would review. So it's like trying not to have a baton pass between two different operating areas. It makes sense for them to have that resource at the department. So that's the structure. It's still the scenarios that we were talking about. There's the potential for the stakeholder group to define the scenarios, including the assumptions and the inputs. We name everyone that was in the House version. It's just an attempt to integrate. I would say the other thing that I found problematic in the House structure is that although the departments invited to participate, the whole notion of having a facilitator that's going to deal with parties that don't see eye to eye, and those I'd say broadly are the DUs, the renewable energy industry or community, and it's like, okay, great, helpful to have those parties having a facilitated conversation, but it leaves up the third leg of the stool, which is the department, which is inevitably part of every single piece of work we do. So it puts them all in the same, it puts to me, the third leg back on the stool. You want to make it a four-legged stool? I say the fourth leg is the legislature. Ultimately, we're always in there. But honestly, it didn't seem productive to me to have that work going on without a major party that's always looking at things differently, and that we always end up by statute working with, namely the department. So this was my best effort at taking what I was hearing in the House study and putting it into a framework that lets all the parties proceed in an explicit public format. That's my explanation. Why and where this came from.
So I'm sorry if you've already had this discussion, but taking a step back, this is proposed to be section 35 of this amendment.
Yeah.
Sections 25 to 34 are the sections of S112 that this committee that passed out of the Senate. The House has made no changes to them. S112, the only change that they made was tacking on their version of an RES study group, which is a significantly different format than what you have here. And so S112 came back from the House yesterday. It's on notice today in the Senate. So at some point, I don't know if you want me to review that with you, but I think this is just sort of offering and against that.
Right. So we're sending back S112 was passed by the Senate. Senator McCarthy, is that right?
Yeah. This late in the session, the definition of germane gets bigger, but we're confident that these are all germane.
Is that a question?
Yeah.
Something is only non-germane when someone challenges it on the floor.
And it's late in the session.
It is late in the session. The underlying H126 is biodiversity and community resiliency. This amendment, you will see, does propose to change the name of the bill so that it encompasses the other sections. Yes, there potentially could be an issue with germaneness, potentially. I don't know all the other sections that are in the rest of this amendment.
So maybe if we don't have questions for Ms. Schupp, you have to leave by 9:30 to go to economic development.
Yeah, but it's not a lot. It's not a far walk.
Well, no, I just mean like, I want to make sure that we also have Mr. O'Grady like walk us through the balance of stuff to remind us of what we have here, like including 112.
Thank you, Chair Bray. So you also drafted the language that was in 112 that the House has done.
Yeah.
Are we going, I do want to understand a comparison between the two. I don't know if this is the appropriate time for that.
Sure.
So it's not, so can I just tell you what I think the differences are?
Sure.
So I believe the differences are that they have legislatures, 2 from each body on their work group,
Mhm.
and the Public Service Department and the PUC are members of that, or they're not members. Okay.
No, it's 16 non-legislative members and 4 legislative members. So it is a 20-person working group with 8 instances of tasks.
Compared to, we don't have any tasks outlined in here, but our assumption was that we would get essentially what the Public Service Department was doing, and this would be on top of that work. Is that a correct way to think about it?
Yeah, I've been thinking about it when we, when TJ was in here, we said we were trying to do complementary reporting.
Yes.
It's like, okay, what can't you do that we might want to know? And he said, well, we asked that like 3 different days when he was in. It boiled down in the end, to me, what he was saying was, we can't do the REMI work. We have Ken Jones at ACCD, he's gone. We don't have anyone in our shop who does that. We don't use that tool. We would like to know the broader economic impact, but we're not in a position to do it. So, okay, so how would we build REMI into the study group? And then he presented 3, 4, 5 scenarios, and there were a couple TBDs. And so my sense from our conversation was that we liked the scenarios that he listed. There was some concern about what are the inputs and what are the underlying assumptions, and that we would need other stakeholders to have some influence over what the inputs are and what those assumptions are. So my thought was, rather than us trying to name everything, to have this working group, this bigger 16-person group from the House version, be part of the process for naming the scenarios, the inputs, and the assumptions, so that we're doing economic modeling, not just what the department would have necessarily done on its own, but what the broader stakeholder group would also like to see modeled.
So I think, okay. So to that point, with the new language that the House has, they would still be doing the public service part, or the PUC they all still be doing that work, just without a stakeholder group. What is the overlay in the House version with that group, or with the work that they're doing now? They're kind of separate.
Yeah, there's a reference that the DPS can provide input to the group based on what it's working on.
Yeah.
I can find the exact language. The other thing I would say is that it asks for appropriating money for a mediator as well as data analysis, but it's also asking for a report on all of the topics and draft legislation. It has, I think, more dimensions to it than what this is contemplating.
Okay, thank you.
So do people want to hear what's the balance of the amendment? If you do that, we can come back to this part of it, but,
The balance of which amendment?
well, a review basically of the other bills that we are picking back up again to move again.
I'm a little confused about what you mean.
Okay,
Sorry.
so this is like, we don't usually do this, but end of session, when the clock's gonna run out, or you may not see back. One of the ways to help address the shortage of days on the calendar is take something you've already passed and put it on something else that's traveling for sure. So 126, for instance, will be going back to the House. it will be back in the house tomorrow, right? So, well, could be, it will go back to the house. I'd actually like to see if we can expedite the timing of it by getting it to them sooner rather than later. Then they would have all three of these bills we've already done and our renewable energy standard language wrapped into one miscellaneous or omnibus bill. Yeah, we've been through this before, but we haven't done this this committee hasn't done this session.
What would, so I guess, so process-wise, that would mean S12 would die. I'm assuming we wouldn't be picking it up and concurring with the House then. So ultimately that bill,
112 that's coming to us.
yes.
Yeah, it would be redundant, like we wouldn't pick up 112 with the res study on it and pass it. We would send S112 with this res proposal on it as part of 126.
But, wait, hold on. So we would, just so I understand. So, okay. H126, biodiversity, your proposal is that we add this amendment to it. I do think Senator McCormick's question is valid, is I think germaneness might be called up on the floor if it comes up. It does seem, I can see an argument for both sides.
Yeah.
So that's one path. That's the path your suggestion, which
Right.
has pros and cons. The other path, if I'm understanding correctly, is we have received S112 back from the House with their version of this. How are we're going to bring those two bills together? Okay, so explain what's happening.
So S112 with that version would come and be on our, to sit on our calendar. S112 with this version of the RES would ship to them as part of 126.
So
When
we
they
would
take
just
up, when they get 126, it would include 112, 80, 93, and the rest.
But when you say it would sit on our calendar, we don't have possession of S112.
No. I mean, it's not, right, we don't
If
have.
it comes back,
It comes back to the Senate,
the Senate has, I wasn't, by we you mean this
right?
committee?
This committee
Oh,
doesn't
right,
have
no.
possession.
Yeah, so when it go to, where would it go? What would?
It sits on the calendar unless you refer it back to a committee.
So we would have to get it referred back to us.
If you want to
Or
do
we
any
could
work
bring-
on
Or
it.
we could bring an amendment to the floor on it alone, I mean, so the normal thing, like either concur for the amendment here.
It feels,
The
okay,
normal bill
So
choices.
if you were to work, if the question will be, do you concur with S112 as it has come back?
Yep.
If you were to do any work on it, you may not have enough legislative days for
Yes.
it to pass.
but if we concur, it would just,
Yes.
versus H126, we have a little bit more time based on what you've described. If we added a.
126, that travels over to the House, there's this package that goes to notice. Ideally, it's on their notice calendar tomorrow. It's Friday, their action calendar.
And so we'd be adding S112 to H126, and that's the balance, that's the amendment that you're talking about that Mike would go over with us.
Right.
Sorry, can you say that again?
So my understanding of what we're doing,
Yeah.
now that I'm trying to understand the play,
Yeah.
because I want to understand the pros and cons of both options.
Mhm.
We would be adding S112 to 126 along with S80, S30, S93, and this bit that you have.
So attack them all.
But is there a way, but we wouldn't lose in the alternative scenario, S80, S93, or H126. They would
Oh, because
still,
they all live elsewhere, but it's just that they're gonna be acted on. They're favorably this session. They would have to wait.
is there a path forward where we could still get S80, S93, and H126 and concur with the House on S112?
I can't tell you anything about the others except S112. I don't know anything about them.
But I think that will be up to the House.
Okay.
Mr.
So
Radel,
S80 still needs to go to House Appropriations. And so it would have to come out of there, it would be put on the notice calendar. They'd have to suspend rules to take it up off the notice calendar. Then they could bring it to the floor after House of Pros votes it out, and then they would have to suspend rules again. If they don't get rule suspension on it, they're likely not going to be able to move that bill before Friday.
So we will likely lose S80 if we don't do this. Is that my understanding? If we don't do your version of the plan?
It will.
Because that sounds like it's not gonna happen if I think logically about it with the amount of days we have left.
Yeah, I mean, I think these things will,
Sit.
the individual bills will still travel, but just they will travel too late for action this session.
And that's the same with S93.
So, I mean, one way to, I suppose, to rephrase all this is, there's a chance of getting all these things done before we go home by bundling them up.
Yeah.
All the bills themselves are individually preserved wherever they are. But just like creating 126 becomes a wheelbarrow, and it carries along with it other bills we've already worked on.
And how do our friends at the house feel about our wheelbarrow?
I'd say there's mixed reactions to the wheelbarrow.
And we would need them to concur for it to actually. So this is kind of like, I think it is too risky.
Well, we can do the risk analysis.
But that's not a lunch council question. Okay.
Thank you,
you.
Mr. Gowsky. Senator McCormick, then we should hear if Michael could go to Michael next and get a
Okay.
walkthrough on what's in
Do you
there.
want Michael now, or can I ask?
Go ahead,
Okay. I see this as bills that are languishing and not likely to meet the deadline, and this is a way to expedite it. Sometimes this tactic is used as coercion. You say to the other house, if you want this bill, you're gonna have to pass it with this in it. It's a way of getting tough. I'm not saying that's what, I'm actually asking, and it's not a rhetorical question, it's an inquiry. Is there any element of coercion in this?
Uh, You're in the wrong building to ask that.
Strategery, is there strategery afoot?
I would say, sure, there's a difference of opinion. We passed different versions of all these bills. 126 came to us, it was slated for a veto. It's no longer slated for a veto. The A&R supporting it, et cetera. I'd say the same, S80 is coming back to us, it is slated for a veto. As close as you can get to being told it will be vetoed, I've researched that word. S93 was just, I don't know, didn't get taken up on time. 112, the difference is the RES. So what we're really talking about as a difference is the language for the RES. Does it operate based on bringing the stakeholders into the department's process, or do we have it as an independent group sort of housed at JSO and the department and the PUC are sort of on their own bubble over there? I thought it was honestly better to get everyone in the same room.
I'm not objecting to being coercive. Sometimes it's necessary and there's a certain pleasure in it. I just wanted to make sure we had our eyes open.
My experience is that the same kind of thing has happened. I've been both at sending and receiving ends of stuff.
Yeah.
We end up negotiating stuff back and forth all along. I'd say I don't see, the only real point of contention I see is the RES. And it's just a different view. I've talked directly to Representative Sebeli about this starting last week. I've been open about my concerns about operating separate, doing two separate programs that suggest to me we're going to be at the same place next year of we're going to have competing narratives from two different groups, and the real work of writing whatever happens next on the RES, I think ought to be committee based anyway. I mean, this committee spent 26 days writing the RES back in 2015. It was pretty much like our work on S5. It was a long, detailed piece of work. The House did a similar thing under Chair Klein. And I'm feeling it, the RES, because it defines the energy, that sounds dramatic, but the energy future for the state. It is appropriate that it be an intense committee process. So I'm just hoping we have good data out of that process. And we have modeling that's useful. Senator Watson.
Yeah, thank you. So I am also worried about packing all of these things onto 126 in a way that ultimately gets us nothing. And so just want to state that concern. And, as far as the renewable energy study goes, I appreciate that, you're trying to merge them. I still have some questions about that. Anyway, so I'm like I said, I'm worried about losing all of it, due to germaneness, due to the house not concurring, and
Well,
anyway, just,
yeah, the germaneness question, I think, it would. It could come up. There's two things. One, you get to talk to the presiding officer about why you get to make your germaneness case. Then you can get a ruling from the presiding officer. Then you can make a non-germane motion germane by vote of the body if you have the support of your colleagues. Mr. O'Grady, can you remind me, making a non-germane motion germane is a simple majority vote, or is it a supermajority? Do you remember?
Great question.
I don't know if it's 2/3 or 3/4.
I thought it was, you had to suspend the rules, so.
It'd be 3/4.
But I can email Melissa.
Okay. But just for peace of mind, like, so that people say, oh, I know exactly what's in this large amount. Like, I think it's all familiar to people because it's all been passed, but when Michael's been connecting with the secretary's office, we could just walk through and see it. And yeah. I wish we had another day.
Yeah.
But at this moment, we don't.
You can vote, the Senate can vote to override the presiding officer on germaneness. And if that fails, then you move to make a non-germane germane.
Oh yeah, that is a simple majority vote.
So, well, no, because then you'd go for that first. Oh, no, because that hasn't been ruled.
Yeah, it's the other way around.
Right.
Yeah, that is,
But I've only seen that.
it's also called the nuclear option, to override your presiding officer.
oh dear.
I saw it happen once to the speaker, was not a happy scene.
Your next committee is outside.
In the parking lot.
I have seen it done, but.
When I was in the house, it happened.
Oh,
Several times.
and so that's why I'm on this committee?
So I believe Ellen's version with the updated RES language is on the committee's website right
Yeah,
now.
but the copy they have, we get it in time today, 5 more copies.
Right, so this will be current other than the last two pages.
Right.
And then the last two pages would be this version.
As you've already discussed, you are adding to your proposal on 126, S80, S93, and S112. S80, as I already indicated, is in the House Appropriations Committee. It was sent there yesterday. S93 was originally in Ways and Means, but it was Ways and Means relieved themselves of it and sent it to to send it to House Environment and Energy. It's in their committee right now. No movement to my knowledge. S-112 is as noted on, scheduled to come back to you today or tomorrow. And then the RES language is new. So I was unaware that S80 was slated for a veto. I was aware that A&R didn't like language that was added to it. There were 2 sections that were not in S80 as you sent it to the House that were added, and there was 1 section that was in S80 that you sent that was removed because it is in the Capitol bill.
And what are the times?
So I can just point out the new sections if you would
Sure.
like.
Yeah, but I think probably, point of view, just knowing the change really is probably the most important thing.
They are sections 11 and 12 on pages 11 and 12. And remember, in S80, you had authorized the DEC to transfer up to $275,000 of EPA pollution revolving loan funds to a state wastewater fund. And that wastewater fund has historically been funded by up to $275,000 of permit fees on wells and wastewater systems. You are giving the agency the ability to use that federal $275,000 instead. The House Corrections and Institutions Committee was concerned that the authority to use the federal funds was because the permitting fees were not sufficient to both cover the department's cost of staff and to pay for the state program that was funding replacement of failed wells and failed septic systems. So they put in a provision in section 11 that provided that A&R could transfer those EPA monies for 1 year, for fiscal year 24. But after that fiscal year 24, they could not transfer the monies until they submitted back to you the fee report that is in H494. It's a report required for several different agencies to effectively provide a comprehensive report detailing and justifying their current fee amounts. The concern is because A&R has not amended its fees since 2015, 2016, that permitting fees at the agency are not sufficient to cover the cost of their various programs, which is the reason permitting fees are charged. When you look at the definition of fee in Title 32, it is for a service or regulation rendered by an agency. And so that is what they are supposed to do. The fees do go into what's called the Environmental Permit Fund, which is used to pay costs of the agency. If you don't have enough permitting fees at the agency, they have to seek other funds. They do seek federal funds, but they can't pay from permit funds or federal funds. They need general funds. And so corrections and institutions, you get to transfer that $275,000 per year until you provide your comprehensive fee report, until you provide an accounting of the 2 EPA state revolving loan funds, the clean water and the drinking water. And then the General Assembly would need to further authorize transfers going into the future. So that is section 11. Section 12 is that report that requires an accounting of the 2 EPA SRFs, the clean water SRF and the drinking water SRF. Those funds are pretty much the most viable of the state revolving loan funds because they are capitalized from appropriations from the federal government under the Clean Water Act and the Safe Drinking Water Act. So I believe the Clean Water SRF has around 80 million in it, moving in various ways. It is basically a bank. And so that would be the fund where 275,000 could be taken, shifted to this state-based fund to fund private failed system. Traditionally, the SRFs were really only for municipalities and private entities working with municipalities. But over the past few years, EPA has relaxed the restraints on the use of the SRFs and has allowed for money for private projects. The House Corrections and Institutions Committee is still concerned about the use of state bonded dollars because the state cost shares those monies that come from the Fed, of using state bonded dollars for private projects. And so that is one of the concerns that Corrections and Institutions had. They put a kind of provision in it to limit that, but still, I assume this is what A&R and the administration is objecting to in
It
S80.
was the section 7 followed on the period floodways. That's.
Well, that is not in
Right.
your proposal. The House replaced one of the sections in S80 with a requirement that A&R have a stakeholder process proposing how to regulate the riparian areas of the state, whether or not to have what's called fluvial erosion hazard zoning as a mandate, whether to have mandated buffer sizes, etc. That seemed pretty harmless to me.
Yeah. Right, so the administration should speak for themselves, but shorthand I got was that process in terms of time and resources, they didn't get any resource, and they had a schedule they said was half as much time as they needed, and so they earned the bill an unfavorable recommendation.
It's interesting because every other section in the bill pretty much is what they recommend.
I know, that was that late addition that was the
Okay.
changed the story, and I suggested that they not change the story in such a way that it synced the bill, and so that's, you know, what our version does. It just sends, it does what the House did, but removes that.
Takes the controversy.
Somebody
that
called it a
controversy.
poison pill, you know, so it takes the poison pill out and sends it to people.
Well, that's really the only change in 80 that is in H126 amendment. There are no changes to 93 and 112 as you have passed those, the Senate has passed those. 93 starts on page 29. It is just that language regarding advanced wood-fired boilers and the sales tax exemption on them. And that's really it. It's what you, and then beginning on page 30 is where you have the 112 sections. I'm not very familiar with these sections. They were Ellen's, but they go to page 41. They are the Senate passed version. And then section 35 on page 41 is the RES language that Ellen updated this morning based on input from interested parties. Then the effective date is on page 42. Everything except the sales tax exemption is effective on July 1. Sales tax exemption is June 30th. Fiscal year.
So the version that you last created included Ellen's last.
Yeah, Ellen updated the amendment this morning. I was in the conference.
Yeah, no problem. I just wanted to keep an eye on the details. Okay, so that the outline of what's there. And here's my, the roadmap of what's in it. So if someone said, well, what's different? You know, for me, it's like 80 takes out the part that was, 93 is unchanged. 12 takes out the RES study, leaves 112 as is, and includes the RES as redefined and merged into the new language we're looking at this morning.
So FYI, I got an email back from the Senate Secretary's office. It's a 3/4 vote.
Thank you, Chair Bray. So would it be possible for us to add S80, S93 to this bill, to H126, but then concur with S112 that the House has? Could we separate that out? Would that be a third pathway that we could do legislatively?
You asking if it's parliamentary doable or whether it's a good idea?
I think the parliamentary would go to you and the good idea might go to the chair and maybe to the committee as a whole. So I'm asking.
Could you repeat the question?
So the proposal we have right now from the chair, from my understanding with this bill, includes having H126 get S80, get S93, and get S112 with the res languages you've presented. Is it possible for us to keep S80, to keep S93 in this bill, and to not keep S112 with that res language, but then to instead concur with the House? Like, is that a pathway that could exist with this bill as it stands?
Well, what you put in this amendment is up to you. So if you want to include or not any provision or any bill, that's up to you. As to the S112, I think it's a matter of days. And do you have enough days to get it back, do whatever you would want to it, concur or not, concur, propose further proposal, go to conference committee, that might be the quickest way to do it. And then meet all the procedural needs by the end of the session. You probably would need a rule suspension here or there, unless you concur.
Yeah, so I think I personally, at this moment, totally respect where you're coming from with the res language and the conversation we've had in committee. If I had a magic wand today, what I would do is I would put S80 and S93 into H126 as we have it, and then I would concur with S112 that the House has put forward as is, and not have it be a part of it. Although I'm that's just how I feel at this moment.
So I'm not sure about the urgency of some of these things. Like if we don't pass, if we don't bundle these things together, S80, S93, those are over in the House right now. Yes.
Yes.
Correct.
And so they are going to stay over there, and they could be worked on next year. And I heard this, the part about, I think this maybe was, I'm trying to remember if this was part of the S80 or 112. There was something about the fiscal year 24. So that might be affected, but it seems to me that everything could be potentially pushed back. I guess I'm not sure about the urgency to bundle everything. I guess I want to respect the process and let things stand on their own merits. And I'm also interested in concurring with 112.
We also do have the chair of Energy and Environment in the room from the House, so I don't know.
I've noticed.
Okay.
My eyes are working pretty well.
In
Senator
case
McCormick?
anyone on the.
I'm just gonna say, this is still the process. The process has some rough neighborhoods. We're going into one of the rougher neighborhoods.
Senator McDowell, any thoughts? Other than Billy Bob?
I think we're embarrassing ourselves, Mr. Chair. We're the members of the public, and they've elected us to make decisions. We keep turning around and trying to get the stakeholders to recommend stuff that we ought to be, stand up and say what we ought to do. This is what happens at the end of the
Are you
session.
talking about the RES?
Excuse me?
Are you talking about having
No, just the
stakeholders
sort of
recommend the RES solution?
no, it's, democracy is slow and it pushes towards the middle, and we can't out clever ourselves to try and make things come out the way we'd always like them to. I'm sitting here writing silly things like, it's just, we having he's secretly being taped by Saturday Night Live so they can run it on Saturday night and laugh at us
Not that I'm aware of.
for being
Could be a-
overly
could be a
overly
TikTok
wrapped up in
session
what we're
coming out of
doing.
it.
Sometimes the ball goes under Bill Buckner's glove. You gotta deal with it, so. I think this is let the process work it out, and don't try and be more clever with attaching this and this and this and this and this.
So,
We got, have lunch with the people in the other body and try and get to some sort of a confidence.
how would you like to proceed?
I'd like to adjourn.
Christina, we're being called to the floor. So, yeah, I'll find out what our floor schedule for being on the floor more than once today, or, and then communicate to members of the committee, follow up with people between now and adjournment today, so. But for now, let me just stop there. So food for thought, no decision. But we have the amendment as last draft. It includes all the most current language. So I just want to make sure for to do anything that it's whatever, legally sound, like the I's are dotted, T's are crossed.